Operating at an extraordinary level can seem challenging. Learn how to survive in the lone wolf economy in the OG Money podcast with Lonnie Ogulnick. Drawing on over 20 years of experience in the trenches of Wall Street, Lonnie explores what it takes to be successful in today's rapidly changing environment. From daily routines, wealth strategies, and sustaining the highest levels of wisdom, Lonnie and his guests unpack proven ways to live an extraordinary life.
Welcome to the OG Money Podcast. Today I have a special OG, the one and only Joaquim Valente. Joaquim, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Lonnie. It's a pleasure to be here in such a nice podcast, especially with you. Not only watching the podcast, listening to the podcast, but watching all of your Instagram videos in the morning. It serves as a great motivation for all of us waking up, trying to have a great day, and it's like a morning starter.
It's kind of interesting that, like, when I hear that from someone like you, right? Like, that I can motivate you, because I just do it. Well, the OG Money Podcast started, as you know, as a spoof. It was just like a meme video I would do in the morning, just as like a welcome to the OG, and then it turned into something real. I think you might have even been like, you should do a real podcast.
Yes, I remember us talking about it.
Yeah.
But I think it really has to do with energy. The energy that you put out, be it in talking business, or if it's just early in the morning in a story on Instagram, or if it's during class, you really push the best of yourself out. And I think that's something genuine. It's something that people feel, and people like that. Be it to be as a advisor for investments in the financial market, or as a friend to hang out, or someone that is just going on a ski trip with us. It's not someone that brings the energy up and brings the best out of the situation. And this is not coming from me. We have a lot of friends in common, and everyone always speaks very highly about you in that sense that it's always great energy. And I think that's something very important in life.
I mean, that's really good. It's really good to hear, because whether you know this or not, right? Like, I come to tactical, right? And you taught me a lot how to use self-defense properly. Self-defense is something that now is ingrained, whether it's Jiu Jitsu or using a firearm. I walked into this place not knowing how to hold a gun, load a gun, or anything. Now I felt like if I was ever put in a specific situation, I could handle myself in any situation, right? So, but I'm still very cognizant about I have a long way to go. But quite often, maybe someone would look at the price tag on like what that costs you, right? And I always justify, well, I'm paying probably a half for firearm self and half as my psychologist. Yeah. Because I come in every Wednesday. And as I could be up, I could be down, I could be around the corner, whether it's my wife, my kids, my family. I come in with a lot of baggage. So to hear that I get a good sense of energy out, sometimes I don't always feel that good energy, right? Like sometimes I feel down, and you bring that up. So I look at you as the ultimate, like, that mind that you have, it's impenetrable, right? Yeah. It seems like you're never down.
Well, I think perfection is something that we're always striving for, but it's going to be hard to reach. But if we wake up every day and we're trying to, improve and get better, we're going to see over a long period of time, similar with investment, you're going to see a very positive return. And that's what we're looking for. A lot of times, friends of mine and students, they see our lifestyle, they see the way we live, they see the way we eat, they see the way we exercise, the way we train. And many times they're like, okay, I need to change my life drastically. And that's never our approach. Start coming to class, start with once or twice a week, maybe 3 times a week. And slowly you're going to see those changes really being incorporated to your daily routine, which is what we want. And many times those drastic changes, they might happen for a short period of time, but they won't stay. And talking specifically about the training that you do here tactically, first on the mat where it started, I always tell people that you see the true characteristics of people on the mat. And when you go in to train Jiu-Jitsu, you give your best. And I think it was the same thing with tactical. When you started, you weren't coming 3 times a week, 4 times a week. It was that 1 time a week class that just maintained over and over. And over a long period of time, you learn basic weapon manipulations, right? You know how to clear a room. You know how to defend your home using the firearm. We've worked on vehicle tactics, right? So if you have a gun and you're around a vehicle, how to use that weapon. So all those things really come together in giving you the preparedness necessary to have that calm peace of mind that will actually help so that nothing ever happens. So that if you're put in a situation where you have the chance to de-escalate, so that if you have the chance to avoid a fight, you're going to do everything possible, not have to use both your hand-to-hand skills, which you're very trained, you're purple belt in Jiu Jitsu, and also in the tactical side, not to have to use that firearm. So that's why it's a very known phrase that is used, it comes from Latin, it's used all around, but if you want peace, be ready for war. And the more prepared you are, the more your body and your mind is for moments of crisis, the less the chance that you're going to have to use those skills.
Yeah, so I'm a little bit of a volatile guy, right? Like if I don't get my sleep, I'm a little bit snappy, right? You've seen that. I've come in, you're like, how you feeling? And if I got that 5 or 6 hours sleep, I'm like, oh man, Joaquin, I don't think I could train. I'm off. Like, I don't know. And you're always like, good. I'm like, what do you mean good? And you're like, this is the best time to train, because when that situation happens, whether it's in the middle of the night or you're tired from work and there's a situation that happens, you want to train when you're at your worst, when you're not feeling good. Yeah. Because if you can perform in that environment, you can perform in anything. And then I took that into the business world, right? I go to work sometimes. I'm not really sleeping well, but in my brain, I hear you going, well, you can train just as good. It's all in your head, you know, and then I take that and I trade well, because I'm thinking how you're saying to me, if you can do well in this type of environment on lack of sleep, you can do even better. So, but I do want to ask you a question. How many hours of sleep do you need every night? Because without 7 hours of sleep, I just don't feel like I'm Lonnie Ogulnick. I feel like I'm someone else.
Yes, and I think that sleep is very important. It's one of our main elements of health, part of the 753 code, in which we always strive to get those at least 8 hours of sleep. But you're a busy man, right? You do a lot of things, both with your job, with your personal life. You have kids. You're very involved with your kids. I always see that you're taking them to sporting events and all those things. So sometimes we don't have the ability and the privilege to get those 8 hours. And I think it's all about the mindset. Personally, me, when I get those 8 hours of sleep, I feel that it really helps me. But if I don't get those 8 hours of sleep, I see as an opportunity, which is the same opportunity that you're describing when you come to class and you have the specific opportunity to be able to work under a condition that could be a reality in combat. It could be a reality in a moment of, a realistic scenario that you're going through in your life. So I think there's two lessons to learn from that. One is the specific element of improving upon the situation, but then there's more of an overall approach, which is always see good, independent of the situation, right? If it's crisis, there's an opportunity. And it's really going to be the difference between the people that focus on, oh my God, there's a crisis, and just talks about the crisis and the problems that we're going through, or the ones that actually take that situation and say, how can we change this? How can we convert this situation into an opportunity for us to be able to improve and to actually gain from this? Because it all cycles back to the graph that we spoke about earlier. If we can, over time, consistently improve, we're going to be able to look back a year ago, 2 years ago, and say, wow, what a change, right? But sometimes if you take a snap picture of that moment, of that class that you came in tired, yes, it might look a little ugly. The drills might not be coming out the way we want, but that's going to have a positive influence for us to be able to improve.
So let me take a step back here. So because my brain is stocks and charts and money, right?
Yeah.
So I hear two things. I hear one, compounding interest, right, with money.
Yep.
We compound over 30 years at 8% becomes a billion, however much you started with, right? And then I also hear dollar cost average, right? Sometimes your stocks are rising, sometimes they're falling. But if you're dollar cost averaging, even when it's painful, you're still sticking to a plan and buying, over time, your portfolio is going to do well. So there's so many synergies with Jiu Jitsu, what you're talking about, mindset and training, whether it's anything, lack of sleep, train well under that environment, and over time, you're just going to get better at it.
100%. And Lonnie, sorry to interrupt, but I think that's the reason why, if you look at our student body, most people that come to our school with tactical and for jiu-jitsu are not the professional fighters. We have great friends in the professional fighting world. We have great friends, athletes that come to train. But in the end of the day, are people that are coming here to prepare themselves, yes, for self-defense and all this. But above all, they're taking the lessons they're learning here in a philosophical way, and they're being able to implement this in their daily lives, connected to their business, connected to their family, relationships. And I think this is really a huge part of what Jiu-Jitsu is and what Jiu-Jitsu can contribute, especially the system that we teach with the 753 code, that many times when you first join the school, it's a little overlooked, right?
Well, that's why people get addicted to jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
You just hit the nail on the head. It's not so much the actual fighting or arm locks or Kimura locks or choking that you're addicted to, right? No one's addicted to choking somebody. You get addicted to actually taking the puzzle of jiu-jitsu and then bringing it home, working on that puzzle, going to work, working on that puzzle, and putting the pieces together. So when the crises are hitting at home or at work, I got to get into jiu-jitsu so I can get all my energy out, my bad energy out. And it's unfortunate, and let's talk about this for a second. The COVID hit. You guys are now thriving and coming back, and the price stock of IC Valente Brothers is on the rise now, right? But you guys hit a divot along with everyone else in the world. But this environment, contact, jiu-jitsu, how did you get through that, and how did you manage, I would say, psychologically when you saw what was happening? Because clearly you're not a guy that looks at the tree, you're looking at the forest. So you're seeing COVID, you're seeing it on the news, you and your brothers are like, you're seeing 7 steps ahead, not 2 or 3. You know what's about to hit.
Yep.
What are you doing right at that moment when you guys come to the conclusion where our livelihoods are at stake right now?
For sure. So I'm the youngest one, and I have 2 great older brothers, Guy and Pedro, who are always applying the same philosophy, but there's always differences, right? So the way I personally see it, I always shake hands with the worst case scenario because that gives me a peace of mind.
So let me stop you right there. I take so much, because I hear a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
And there's so many little tidbits that you say to me when I'm in tactical and we're talking that, like, I've heard that before, right? What's the worst case scenario that can happen, right? And then I go home and I take that to heart, and I manage my finances. So it's amazing how, like, me wanting to learn how to use a firearm at a tactical class at Valente Brothers may have turned into a life-saving issue for my family's finances from something just like prepare for the absolute worst-case scenario and then start from there and go. Because I just recently have done that.
Exactly.
And I think from your help.
Thank you. But, and the way that we shake hands with the worst-case scenario and the way that has an effect in our situation that we're going through, you mentioned COVID, for example, should not be one, I shook hands with the worst case scenario, so now I just sit back and do nothing. We took action. We were talking to school owners in China who were the first ones to see the effect, and they were ahead of us in the whole COVID situation. And we were talking to them and seeing what were the type of restrictions that were being applied to their schools. And we had to close the school down, and we closed because we thought that was the best thing to do at that moment, taking in consideration information that we knew. But I can tell you for a fact that you will always do better with your actions if you have already shaken hands with the worst case scenario, because you're going to have more peace of mind. You're going to be more focused. You're going to be more on point, which is what you need at that moment. What you need is for you to be acting with your processors, if we compare to computing, at 100% efficiency. Because if anything is disturbing your mind in that moment, it's really going to affect your ability to perform, which is maybe what's going to decide if you're going to live or die, right? Based on the situation that you're in. You need to have all that focus on solving that problem.
So let's talk about personality traits. I tend to be a little aggressive. And that's probably to my detriment, but at times it's a positive. So would you say that you're default aggressive or more passive? And how do you control the temper? Like, I have a bad temper. I have a low tolerance for, things that make common sense to me, but maybe most people don't have common sense. Most people, unfortunately, don't see 3 steps ahead or 2 steps ahead. So I get frustrated very easily. How do I control myself from being aggressive or, even on the mats? I can't stop going 1,000 miles an hour, right? Like, I know one mode, but because attack mode, like defense wins, but I've always said offense wins, so like, am I wrong? Should I not be that way? Should I be that way, but rein it in? Like, what's your analysis on that?
I think that as time goes by, Lonnie, it's very hard for when we're the person that we're talking about first to be able to see the improvement, right? It's like your hair. You look at your hair, you're like, my hair looks the same every day.
Yeah, I've always had a good head of hair, though. So maybe that's a bad analogy.
But someone might go say, hey, your hair's long.
Yeah.
And you're like, my hair hasn't changed, right? In that sense of what I meant. But on the end of the day, if I look at you as being my student in your jiu-jitsu, you've calmed down. Yeah. Maybe it doesn't seem like it that way for you. And I think there's still a long way to come for all of us. But, you've definitely worked on your defense. And if you compare Lonnie today with Lonnie from 3 years ago, you have had a huge improvement. But on the end of the day, I think that you can look at it as aggressiveness, but you can also look at someone who's motivated. And I think there's nothing wrong for us to be motivated to wake up every day and to try to give our best, be it in the financial market, be it to, for example, to build the school that we're sitting in right now, right? Which at the time, a lot of people told us, be careful, don't do it. It's a very big project. We went from renting a 6,000 feet location to purchasing a land, doing demolition on an existing building, and building a 3-story facility that is a building.
Yeah, and I think of that time back, and I think of a guy, laser-like eyeballs with his hard hat on, running around. You're always running around doing something. You can't sit still. Oh, why is that? Where does that come from? Because I usually talk about the childhood. So let's take a step back. What was life like at 14 to 17 years old? That, to me, if you could take a snapshot of your 14 to 17 years, like in that time frame, it's a very good, like, later on, that's where you really were built. Like, were you like this then? Like, what was life like in Brazil at 14 to 17? Tell us that a little
14, 17 was living a great time with my father, and he was a man that was always very motivated. My mom also, but my dad couldn't stop. He was,
DNA.
Always finding something to do, something to build. He was a very successful plastic surgeon, grandmaster in jiu-jitsu, red belt, involved with soccer professionally, Vasco da Gama, which is a professional soccer club in Brazil, horseback riding, politics. So he couldn't stop. And I think just going all over the place with him and seeing how involved he was, I think it kind of runs in the DNA. And I think it's a good thing. And I think you have different stages in your life, right? I think I'm at a stage right now that I'm really fortunate to be able to have the time to do this and to have the motivation to do this. And I think the motivation is never going to go away. But I think there's going to be other priorities in the future, which is going to have to slow me down a bit. And I think that's fine.
So, like in a video game, I'm picking you first. Sorry for offending any other brothers. But the reason I'm saying that is because of the tactical solution, right? Yeah. So when you think of the complete...
Even though, be careful. Both Gui and Pedro are very good shots also.
So then I take that back. I'll have to reevaluate that. But I've never seen them shoot. I've seen you shoot. Yes. You're a sniper. So when did this transition happen for you to become a full-blown warrior, in the sense that if you're not in the Navy SEALs, but you're a Navy SEAL, right? You're not there as a Navy SEAL, but like you have the mindset, you live the life. If you're not on the mats training, you're teaching, and then you're at the range shooting. Where did that come from, the motivation to learn how to use firearms? Like, why did this evolve into something where you have a passion unlike anything I've ever seen for shooting?
For sure. And let me just take a step back and say that it's a true honor for us, both on the jiu-jitsu side and through tactical now, to be able to work with the most elite soldiers in our military, with the most elite law enforcement agents, in the country, and everyone, all first responders. I always say this: for SEAL Team 6 to be there, you need to have the military guys who are in the cook and behind the kitchen, right? And they are extremely important. And same thing with law enforcement. So all of them, they have my utmost respect and gratitude and loyalty.
Well, we'll get into that in a second, because I kind of want to talk what's happening with the police department. I kind of want to talk about that for a second.
But before we get there, I will say that even though I see myself being prepared, being capable, and having gone through situations like we have spoken about in our classes in Brazil, some rough times.
What happened? Tell us.
When I was 13 years old, our home got invaded.
Okay.
And I think that was already, at a very young age, a test to the skills of jiu-jitsu, both physically, but also, I would say, especially mentally, to be able to deal with that situation, having 6 guys invade your house at 3 a.m. And
How'd you handle that?
I think that Jiu-Jitsu saved our lives. Both my dad, in being the mastercraft in that situation and being able to make sure that they came in and they came out without harming myself, my sister, him. And
How did he do that?
I think the art of anticipation. By always being ahead of your opponent, by always being ahead on their next move, you're able to really guide them to where you want them to go, which in that situation was to leave.
So was it a discussion to leave, or was it a...
No, it's not. A lot of times when you are ahead of your opponent, you can make him do something without ever having to talk about it. So through different things, as such as not letting them get comfortable in the situation, you can make them have the great idea of saying, you know what, let's take what we need and let's get out of this house.
So that must have left an indelible mark in your head, and maybe is that what triggered you to be like, I have to...
Yes, it did. But I think the most interesting thing in that situation was that could have been a trauma, or that could have been translated into something very positive. And I think that was really the first instance that it comes to my mind where I really saw the transformation of bad into good. Where you took a situation where it was rough, right? And we were able to transform into something very positive. And it was because of my dad. Because they invaded the house around 3:40 a.m. They left the house around 4:50. They were there for about an hour and 20 minutes, maybe 5 a.m. At 6:30, he said, breakfast, and let's go to school. So the police showed up maybe 30, 40 minutes after they left the house. That was their response time. And I don't blame the officers. I blame the system in Brazil. And we spoke to the police. We gave them the information that we had. And at 6:30, I was going to school. And as I was showing up in school, people found out about what was happening, what had happened in my house through the news. And they couldn't believe that I was in school. My teacher in the first class, she sent me to the school counselor to go talk to her. And I remember showing up to the counselor, and she was asking me, look, I heard about what happened. Are you okay? And I said, look, I'm fine. It is what it is. And we're going to make the house into a fortress, and we're going to be prepared even more so it doesn't happen again. And I remember, instead of making the situation more into a discussion, I think she felt that I was in a process of using the school and my class and just life keeps going as a way to come over what had just happened. And she said, perfect, go to class, enjoy your day. And that's where, talking about what we said earlier, shake hands with the worst, but act. As soon as we got home, my dad said, this is what we're doing. This is how we're going to improve the security of the house so it doesn't happen again, so that we can try to sleep in peace tonight, back into the same rooms that got invaded. And at the same time, I want you to train.
What did you do, dig trenches? I mean, what did you do?
If it was back in the day, I think we would. But actually, it was more about bringing, people that were very capable. We lived in a very nice big house in the mountains in Rio, and very hard to protect. But my dad, with his experience, he always liked security, and with his involvement with politics, that was an area that always he had a lot of interest for through Jiu-Jitsu, and through his career, he had great friends who were police officers, and we basically brought a team together to basically come up with the best solution in that situation to make the house as safe as possible. And I will tell you, over time, it just got better. And even though we were living through basically a war period in Rio, which it hasn't changed, it's gotten better and worse, but I felt very safe. I think that house was one of the places that I felt the most safe and the most comfortable, and I think I could sleep in most peace ever.
So when do you get into this situation where you're now like a sniper? Where does this?
I'm not a sniper.
You're a sniper. I mean, you could shoot from like 20,000 feet out and hit a target. I mean, you're straight up like. But I want to know, like, okay, so
Basically that happened in Brazil, and immediately I started training. I started taking shooting classes weekly. I started shooting regularly, and my interest even grew more into that area. I was very involved in organizing the whole security apparatus around the house, and cameras and alarm systems and electric fencing and everything that was at our disposal so that we were ready. As I would come to Miami, to spend the summers with my brother Pedro and Guy also, but Guy was basically doing the opposite trip. I used to go spend the summers here in Miami with Pedro, and Guy would spend the
I remember
summers.
hearing stories about Guy loving, and I'm going to do a podcast with Guy next, but he was into knives. Am I right?
So the interesting thing is that Guy always liked guns and shooting and knives and all this more than I did. And I think once I went through that situation, then my passion and my motivation towards that area really grew. And then when I used to come to Miami, I started training. Every time that I was here, I was training. Pedro used to train regularly also. And so every opportunity that I had, be it with the law enforcement connections and contracts that we have through our school or military or students that are very proficient in that area. There's one person that I always like to talk about, which is Jax Fontaine. He's a student of ours, a black belt and a good friend. And he really helped me, develop my career in the firearms. And basically, it's that never-ending process to improve. Some call it the white belt mentality. I never go in thinking, I know this or I'm safe. Because when you have that mindset thinking, oh, I live in Miami, nothing's going to happen, everything is safe, right? That's when you're the most vulnerable.
So was there ever a time in your life where you weren't going to follow in your brother's footsteps and come into the family business here at Valente Brothers? Or was this always like, I'm going to Miami and I'm going to follow and help and grow this?
Once the school had started and I was coming here as a kid, I was always motivated to be here with them, and that this is what I wanted to do.
Right.
So that's why I give them so much credit, because they were the ones who led the way. And when I came, things were much easier, I think, for me. And that's why I don't take things for granted, and I work very hard to make it even better.
Right. So you have a little history where you got a lot of one-on-one time with Helio Gracie. What was that like?
It was great. I think we could not mention him, because the truth is that during these times, such as the home invasion and the mindset of being ready really comes from him. Being able to grow as a kid, having Grandmaster Helio as your teacher, but above all, for me, as a great friend. He was like my best friend. I used to go in the weekends to be able to spend my weekend with my best friend. And we used to play, we used to hang out. And I think for him at that age, 80-something, even 90s, that didn't change, that continued. I think being with me made him feel very young. And for me to be able to be with him at that age really showed me that life has a long way. And to be able to see someone at that age sparring hard with me, we would go on the mat and he didn't want me to go easy. And he would tell you to lay down. First, he wanted me to attack him. And he wanted me to attack him hard. That's how much confidence he had in his defense.
And did you?
Yes. Yes, and I couldn't catch him. And then he would tell you, okay, now you lay down, you can't escape, and I'm going to attack you. And he would catch you.
Unreal. It's ironic because I see this. I work in a building with a multi-billionaire, Dr. Frost, and he, same way, just cannot, even at this age, get away from the younger generation, wanting to do the deals, wanting to play in the game. Like, that was who he is. It was in his DNA. The age didn't matter. But yeah, I see a lot of, connections there. So you get to Miami here now, and you're probably what? How old were you when you got
When
to
I
Miami?
moved here, I was 18 to 19.
Okay, so what happens like there? You go to college and...
Yes, I started going to college, but I was extremely involved with the school. For us, higher education is extremely important, and the choice of what I went to school for, which was criminology, was already thinking about that connection that we had it both for myself with law enforcement, but also with the school, with all of the public safety work that we do. And it was great. It was a great time being able to go to college, but at the same time being involved with the school and to be able to be inside of a family. Because this is what I really see the Valente Brothers as. A lot of time people see the name Valente Brothers and they think, oh, it's the three brothers, Pedro, Gui, and Joaquim. And I say, no, every single person who's a member of the school is part of that brotherhood. And that's what makes us so strong.
I'll tell you what it is from an outsider.
Yeah.
It's the values. That's what brings everyone together, because if you have role models and mentors and people that you look up to, that you want to get into, you want to talk to, like there's nobody in this school that trains that won't say, that's been here for a long time, they can't go to you, or Pedro or Guy, and just talk and get great advice. So I think for everybody, it's not just learning how to defend yourself, but it's also how do I get better at life. So I often laugh because if I looked at you and, well, not me because I'm not that big, but somebody in a bar or whatever, they're looking at Joaquim Valente, and if they're drunk and they're a tough guy, whatever, you look very, passive.
Yeah.
Ladies, he's single, good-looking guy. But for a guy who's a punk, would never think anything. They would be like, so were you ever presented in a situation where, like, you had to defend yourself because somebody thought they were a tough guy and they realized real quickly that they're messing with the wrong guy?
Yes. I the way I see this is that a lot of times confidence can be passed on. It can be seen in different ways. Because a lot of times you see someone who's very big or someone strong or that looks mean. And you can look mean in different ways, from the way sometimes even that you dress or the way that you portray yourself. And it can go both ways. You can see that as confidence, but you can see that also as insecurity. And I always like to use, the military as an example. The toughest and true warriors, I think the word warrior is really misused nowadays. For me, the warriors of today are the people who are fighting to defend this country, overseas and here. We're basically every day waking up and saying, I'm putting my life at risk to be able to defend people's rights and to be able to protect the citizens of this country. And when you look at the highest level of training, of physical preparedness, we're basically the tier 1 units in the U.S. military. Those are the most nice, humble men that you're ever going to meet. They never have that sense to them of, I know, or it's my way, or who are you to teach me? Quite the contrary. They're trying to learn from everybody. They always have that white belt mentality, right? And they have nothing to prove because they basically do it every day. Through their training, through their deployments, they're always put at the risk, at the test. And I ask them sometimes, I'm like, how do you deal with fear? How do you deal with being in that situation and not knowing what the outcome is going to be? And they say, we trust our training. My mind at a moment of an operation, right before something happens, is not focused on the fear. It's not focused on what could happen. It's focused on what I have to accomplish. I'm mission driven, and I know that I have my job to do at that moment. I know that I'm prepared. I know that I'm trained. I know I'm capable. I know that I have the equipment necessary to be able to safely and efficiently conclude this operation. So that's where my focus is. And I think it's a big lesson for all of us.
Yeah. So I was just thinking in regards to tactical, right? I'm going to kind of conclude with this because I think we got really closer to this tactical, not only in my learning issue, but as a friendship, it's my therapist and everything. So, but the power, I think, in Florida of the concealed carry and the ability to carry firearms and not know who carries firearms in this state is extremely powerful for keeping crime down, right? Because people don't want to mess around. They don't want to play games because they're fearful that someone might have a gun. Do you see at all that could the government intrude on that at some point? Are we on a slippery slope where they could actually prevent us from defending ourselves at some point?
Lonnie, I always like to tell, my students and people that like to talk about, this topic, that the way I see it is this. Just in Florida, there's 2.3 million concealed carry, permits. People who are ready to be able to carry a firearm legally in the state of Florida. I believe the population in Florida is a little over 20 million people. So there is a very high chance when you're sitting down at a restaurant that there's at least, one or two people in there that have both the license and might be carrying a firearm. These are not even gun owners. These are people that have a concealed carry license to be able to carry the gun in the streets when they're walking, when they're going into restaurants, when they're going into Home Depot, when they're going into Publix, right? So when you have that many people and that percentage of the population armed, wouldn't you also want to be ready to defend yourself? Wouldn't you also be able to be capable at least on how to use that firearm? And that's the standpoint, and that's what motivated us to be able, to create VB Tactical. That was one angle. The other angle is that we teach people how to disarm someone. So now you're in a situation where a firearm was being used against you to attack you. You're able to disarm the person, and maybe there's still threats. There's still a live situation in which you're still at risk. I'm sure you would want to use that weapon to be able to defend your life and the life of your loved ones. And that's why it's so important. And that's why I always tell people, I said, you don't have to be in favor of guns, or you could be against guns.
Right.
But you should still learn how to use something that is so, widely available around the whole world.
Yeah. And worst case scenario, God
Because
forbid something happens. You have to be able to.
You go to the states in this country that has the most gun control, and gun violence are still happening.
It's the worst.
Right?
Look at Detroit.
You go to countries where you have the most gun control strict restrictions, and you still have gun violence.
Right.
And there's still a way to be able to have access to a firearm illegally, but it still happens.
Well, that's the issue.
So you want to make sure that as a good citizen, without getting into the politics, that you're able to defend yourself.
Right.
And that's why preparing yourself should be something that everyone should look to do if they believe that's important for them.
All right, so I asked you a lot of questions. I'm going to wrap this up. Do you have a question for me?
So, Lonnie, a lot of times when we talk after class or before class, I really get the sense that dealing with the markets, dealing with clients, sometimes it feels like you're in the battlefield, right? And it causes stress, and we try to deal with that stress in the best way possible. How do you feel that Jiu Jitsu and tactical has a direct application to your life? We spoke over here about in a general way, but I want to talk specifically about the market in the finance world. How do you think that it helps you directly?
Okay, so on the jiu-jitsu mats, right? Jiu-jitsu is a never-ending puzzle. So you're making a move, and then I'm making a move. And then you're making a move, and then I'm making a move, right? And that goes on infinity till somebody taps or what have you. In the stock market, it's the same thing. You might be in a stock, and it's making a move, and it's making a move, and then you have to make all these decisions, and clients are coming to you to make decisions for them while they're at the office, what have you. When you're on the map, because you're a Navy belt, black belt, whatever, you're already thinking 8 moves ahead, right? But I don't know the 8 moves, and I'm the student. So because I've been on the battlefield, and I've been doing this for 23 years, I may be in a stock like Amazon 8 years ago, and it dropped 30%. I see 8 moves. Amazon's not going to stay here. It's going to go a lot higher. Convincing the client, understanding that this is a drawdown and a pullback, and that just hang in there for the long haul. This is a long-term investment. I equate my investing strategy with the long-term vision of like what moves are happening now versus what happens in the future. So the markets are very similar in that sense that you have to be able to think very far in advance. And then you also have to be able to know when to tap and say, okay, I'm cutting my loss on this one. Let's start over again. You know?
So if we talk about specifically in Jiu-Jitsu, and I'll basically talk about the Jiu-Jitsu side, and you can compare it to, the finance side. You're passing the guard, you're having a hard time passing, and you're very close to passing. And I sweep you, and this is 10 minutes into sparring already. So you're already a little winded. Maybe you spent about 60 to 70% of your gas tank. And now I sweep you, I mount on top of you, and I put all my weight of my pelvis pushing into your stomach. You feel like you're having a hard time breathing. And now I cover your face and I start smothering. And a lot of times when I do this, people ask, why do I have to stay here? Why can't I just panic and try to get out? Which is the normal instinct, right? Or tap. And I think that the chances of something like that happening, of you being stuck like that in a real fight, are very little. Because usually people are going to be trying to hit you, they're going to be trying to strike you, giving you the chance to escape. But I believe that value is one of the biggest things that you can learn on the mat. Because sometimes there are situations that you can't panic and that you're not going to have the option to tap out. Does that translate to the markets?
Yeah, so I have to dissect two things, right? So there's my personal trading account where I'm okay with you pushing me down and waiting for my moment of opportunity. Because if I truly believe in an idea, I'm okay, because eventually that pressure is going to come off and then I'll be able to reverse you. And then in the world of the stock market, again, the pressure of the equity or the investment could be a near-term drawdown where I just see it as a pullback by the pullback. And over time, this thing's going 10x higher, right?
So you could have a lot of volatility in your personal account.
Right.
And that volatility doesn't really have a negative effect on you.
It will
because
not
you
affect me.
believe
Right.
in the returns that
Right.
you're going to have over time.
Right.
But clients, on the other hand...
Well, now we're talking about a whole different animal, right? So now I have to deal with the client calling me and in disbelief that...
Why am I down 20%?
Right. And sometimes it's in a day. There's flash crashes, there's pullbacks, there's drawdown, there's news about the taxes are going up or rates are going up.
So my question to you is, if they train Jiu-Jitsu and they had the ability to be able to be smothered and knowing that they have to relax and they have to breathe, and the best thing to do at that moment is not to tap out, it's not to panic, it's just to wait. And that many times through waiting, you're able to allow your opponent to move, and then you have the chance to escape. You have the chance to be able to bring that account up.
Yeah, I mean, so the psychology of the client is something, everyone's different. It's like a snowflake. Everybody's different. Some people believe in you, trust you, and they don't worry about anything, and they trust you to make those decisions for you. But in equities also, I've lived through Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns going to $0 or $1 or what have you. So there are often times where like you have to make the decision, like, are we heading towards a financial crisis? And we have to get to cash and move out and not hold and wait.
But that decision is still made in a conscious, in a rational, and in a very focused way.
Absolutely.
So if you're panicking, a lot of times people will say that's the reason they're doing it. But if it's upon your emotions taking over, then the truth is that maybe that was not the best decision.
Well, here's how I'll explain this. So I've been doing 23 years of stock trading. So I've been staring at a screen for 23 years. How long have you been training jiu-jitsu?
20 years.
20 years. So there's
Sorry. I just thought I was still 23 years old. I'm actually been doing jiu-jitsu for almost 30 years.
Right, so there's a feel,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes you can feel, you can sense, and sometimes you still get caught, even though after 24 years, 25 years, whatever it is, you're still in a situation.
Which is good.
Right.
Because if you're not getting caught, that means you're not pushing yourself.
Right, but shaking hands with the worst case scenario is where I would say goes back to like, okay, well, let's look at this scenario here. The rates from the Fed are 0. They have no intention of going up. Taxes might be going up. Okay, once we learn the tax code, we'll live with whatever it is. I don't think we need to panic here. I don't think this is the beginning of a financial crisis. My 30 years, 25 years doing this says when rates start rising and they go too far, we're headed for a crash, right? So there's little things you learn and then you manage. Again, I still get caught, but for the most part, I think over time, if you're in the right themes, if you're doing the right thing, you're going to be okay. But the hardest part is being in a position and then selling at exactly the wrong time. And there's so many investment themes, as you and I have talked about, that have drawn down 2050, but have gone 10x already, right? So jiu-jitsu and the markets are very similar. Jiu-jitsu in life is very similar. Jiu-jitsu with marriage. I mean, jiu-jitsu in everything. And that's why I think you often talk about it as a philosophy. It's a way of life, because jiu-jitsu is life, really. And I hope to get in here a lot more as my kids head off to camp this summer. I'll be here a lot more. And I appreciate everything you do, not just on the mats, not just in tactical, but being one of my close circle of friends that I can trust and count on for anything at any time. So thanks for the time you took out, and we'll follow up in the future.
Thank you very much, Lonnie. You know, for me, it's always a pleasure, because I always say that I learn more from my students than they learn from me.
Well, I often think of you as the barber. Like, you hear stories from everybody every day. You have more knowledge than anyone. So it's a good.
And I think because we teach so much the philosophy, also students like to talk about the application of that to their businesses, to their lives. And it's really a true honor to be able to be, I consider myself young, and to be surrounded by so many intelligent, capable, and, you know, people that I really look up to. And you're one of them. So thank you very much for having me. I am always very excited for these podcasts, to be able to listen to everyone that you bring here to this, you know, topic of discussion that is connected to finance. But obviously, you're also talking about each of the people that are coming on in their personal lives and what they do. So thank you very much for having me. And
yeah, our leadoff batter was Pedro. You came in next. Just we were talking, and I was like,
"You got to bring Guy now."
Guy's he's on deck. He's 1,000%.
You and Guy have a lot of similarities and things that I think that you guys share, that are that motivation and that direct action of getting the problem solved, and sometimes not having the filter that gets in the way. And it's
well,
very
Guy and
important.
we're very close. Like, we have a very good connection. So I can't wait to get Guy in the seat, and we'll do a few, and then we'll bring another Valente,
Good.
and then we'll get the Pedro's son, and when he's old enough, we'll get him in. All right, thanks a lot. I
Very
appreciate
good.
it.
Thank you very much, Lonnie.
Talk to you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the OG Money Podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available.
Securities offered through Securities America Inc., member FINRA SIPC. Advisory services offered through Securities America Advisors Inc., an SEC-registered investment advisor. This site is published for residents of the United States and is for informational purposes only, and does not constitute an offer to sell or a solicitation of an offer to buy any security or product that may be referenced herein. Persons mentioned on this website may only offer services and transact business and or respond to inquiries in states or jurisdictions in which they have been properly registered or are exempt from registration. Not all products and services referenced on this site are available in every state, jurisdiction, or from every person listed. Third-party comments may not be representative of all customer experiences.